I want to answer a question that I've gotten a lot in comments and a couple times by email. And the question is, what happens to your marriage when you deconstruct? Now, obviously, a lot of different things could happen to different people's marriages. So all I can really tell you is what happened to my marriage when I deconstructed. But I think I had a long talk with my wife about this video. So yes, I am still married. It was neat actually to kind of revisit, because over the years we've talked about, I knew what my deconstruction did to her, and she followed me probably 5 years later. And I'll tell you the story of that as we go. But I think what was over the years we've talked a bit about it, but it was just kind of neat to sit and put down our thoughts together and hear especially from her perspective. Because I think it's often one spouse is kind of deconstructing, the other one doesn't really know what to do. The one who's deconstructing is kind of annoyed because the spouse who's not deconstructing maybe doesn't seem to hear them, or maybe is resistant, or maybe doesn't want to talk about it or whatever. And the other one is freaking terrified because their spouse is deconstructing. So I think it's a really difficult time in life. And for me, it was for me and my wife, it was probably 5 maybe really hard years. And honestly, it could have been a lot better had I handled it better. Maybe there was a little bit on her, but I think it was actually more just about me, and I was the one who deconstructed first. So I'm going to tell you the story. I want to give you some reflections from both of us. She's not on the video because we promised, we kind of talked about it, but I swear to God, we weren't going to do that youth pastor thing where the husband and his wife sit down and talk about it. We did that a little too much in our previous life. So I'm just bringing you reflections on behalf of both of us. So I hope that's cool. So deconstructing marriage. I think I need to start by saying the one overarching thing that we realized as we talked about this just this week is how much evangelicalism obsesses with controlling your marriage, and how much marital identity and marital success gets tied to evangelical identity and success. So we were thinking about this. I remember this old, remember the triangle analogy that as you grow closer to each other, or sorry, as you grow closer to God, so there's a triangle, you're here, your spouse is here. I have to move my hands up. You're here. Geez, this is weird in the camera. Okay, you're here, your spouse is here. As you move closer to God, you're moving closer together. We were taught that. And for a while, I think the thing is my spouse and I was a youth pastor. She was a youth pastor's wife, which meant I got paid and I got all the credit, and she was just basically an extra. I think my helpmate is a very awful way of saying it. So I'm not proud of that. But I think the thing that happened is our marriage was just kind of always on display. Our marriage was almost like a symbol of Christianity can work. And this is look how happy evangelicals can be. Look how happy our marriage is. And we see this, if you are from an evangelical church, you probably have couples like this in your church. Maybe you are one of those couples. You see you get the Focus on the Family magazine, and the happy married couples are on the front of it, and they're telling their kids about Jesus, and they're doing their thing in church. And you go to a marriage conference, and I remember conferences by people was it Les and Leslie was the one couple, Perot, I think. There's all these evangelical power couples who are going to tell you how to level up your marriage. And then at some when I was 18, this took a really weird turn. Before I was even married, but into my marriage, and all of a sudden we started talking about sex. Christians hadn't talked about sex, and all of a sudden it was every man's battle and how to keep yourself pure for your wife so you can have awesome sex. And this is this super weird stuff that evangelical marriage is made of. But all of that to say is if you were an evangelical, your marriage, you're basically socialized to believe your marriage is a part of your faith. And that's going to become really important in a minute. Remember the way that people looked at partners who are unequally yoked. Remember that word? Unequally yoked. Don't marry a non-Christian. So what do you do when you're a Christian spouse and all of a sudden your spouse is on the way to becoming a non-Christian? All of a sudden your spouse is deconstructing, and all of a sudden you're not going to be that perfect married couple anymore. And even if you're not in the limelight like we were at our church as in ministry, you still are aware that there's eyes on you. You are still are socialized to believe a lot of things about marriage and faith that are quite frankly messed up, but are still there and still need to be dealt with and are real. They're real in a way, and that's why it's important to talk about it. So I started deconstructing in seminary, and I've told this story in other videos about how my deconstruction largely came through studying the Bible and realizing that the biblical inerrancy world I was given, that idea did not hold water. Historically, it did not hold water. Logically, it did not hold water. epistemologically. Like there was no way that it made, and there was no way it was true. And my reaction was the same as what happens when a lot of people deconstruct. You get mad, like you get really angry, and you're angry because frankly, you've devoted a lot of your life to something that you now realize could be a lie. And that's a scary thing. And you get angry. And what happens when you get angry and you're married is often your spouse, indirectly or directly, has to feel some of that heat. And that's not cool. Like that's a really difficult thing to go through for a spouse. So we went through a couple years like this. And actually, like I was in ministry for a bit, but I sort of moved out of ministry as fast as I could, thankfully. I went to do a master's degree, and then me and my spouse moved together to a new city, and I started my PhD. So I got to reinvent myself in a religious studies department. Nobody cared if I was a youth pastor, which I had been like not long before. I just became a new person, and that was amazing. Like moving, if you're deconstructing, I'm not saying you have to move, but like if you're deconstructing and you're going to move anyways, do it, because it's so great to like just be able to choose who you want to be, both individually and as a couple, and reform that. However, here's the caveat. It was great for me. It was a nightmare for her. Like she lost her social support network. She lost her friends. Like we're in a new city, and like, yes, there is some like resonance of evangelical gender power dynamics here, because I was the man. We were moving for my thing. She was staying at home with 2 little kids, and she was going off to like prayer groups and like Bible studies with other women who like also had their like mom's Bible studies, like that kind of stuff. And hearing about like happy marriages and like getting more and more of this like constant topic of conversation, right? We even started going to what I refer to now as hipster church. And I was just watching this thing. I did a video about it, but I was listening to this interview with Rhett McLaughlin, and he said hipster church. And that's literally like, I kid you not, when we used to go to this church, I called it hipster church. And it felt a little more progressive, but it wasn't. It was still very evangelical. It was like a breakoff of Tim Keller's denomination. It had, evangelical music. It had all the trappings, but there would always be like a Derrida quote on the front of the bulletin, or it would be like, sometimes they'd have classical music too. Like it was a weird church that like wanted to feel really intellectual while at the same time still being evangelical. The coffee was amazing. The coffee was like next level. Anyway, I was chafing. I would sit at this church and listen to the pastor and want to scream, because it was so like, I was at the height of deconstructing. I was going out to this church because like my wife wanted to go somewhere, and I was like, this is like, I'm so angry. Just like, I wanted to scream at somebody. I didn't. I don't think I screamed at her even, but I was just so upset and so bothered by it. And meanwhile, she's going off to prayer group with these other moms, and like, they're talking about their husbands and like, God has brought us these men and blah, 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 like fill in the blanks. You know exactly what I'm talking about if you've been in an evangelical world. And motherhood, like motherhood is a godly call too, raise godly children, all this stuff. And my wife said like, that was one of the hardest periods of the whole thing. Like she felt so alone. She said once she mentioned to another woman at Bible study, who was I think the wife of a pastor, and said like, did you feel any of the things that like, has your husband ever struggled with faith? And she was just like, well, no, like, and my wife just said like, she felt so alone in all this. And the one thing she told me, she said like one night she was crying and just didn't know what to do and was so at her wit's end with me. And she said she was scrolling through like a Reddit thread, and she said there was just all of this stuff about like, my husband's deconstructing. She said none of it was helpful until she found one thing finally like buried somewhere. Some woman said, you need to know that your husband's love for you is not dependent on your husband's love for God. Your husband's love for you is not dependent on your husband's love for God. And you could flip that around if it's the other gender, deconstructing. I'm making some assumptions here. I'm assuming if you're from an evangelical background like me, you're probably in a heterosexual marriage. But hey, this could work for gay marriage too. So in that, as we were talking about this week, it was she assumed that because I stopped loving God, I was going to stop loving her. And you can see how what I just like, the thing I started this video with, the preface of like all the sociological like baggage around evangelical marriage, and you're socialized to believe that like you will not be happy in marriage unless you're both getting closer to God. Like, no wonder. So what happened when I started deconstructing, she thought I was deconstructing our marriage. Like she thought that this means he's gonna, God is gone and I'm gonna be next. Like, and it seems like at the time I remember her maybe saying things like this and I was like, well, that's silly. No, I love you. But like looking back on it now, I can see how she got there, honestly. And like, I think you probably could too if you've ever spent any time in this world. So that was the first thing. And I think like that's the first thing you need to know. If you're deconstructing, know that your spouse probably feels unsafe in your love. And like that kind of makes sense. And they don't necessarily need to. Like, I don't know, like couples get through deconstruction and stay married, and sometimes they both do. Sometimes one is in, one is out. Like, but like have the sympathy to recognize that that's probably one of the biggest reactions is just like they're worried about what this means for us. They're worried about like what this means. And that's like because of that socialization, but it's also just a normal human thing to be like, you're changing. Like, do you still want to be with me? Am I still part of this? And then the flip side of that, if you have somebody you know who's deconstructing, you're still in it, recognize that the way that you were taught to think about love and marriage might be a little bit flawed if you're looking at it in the way that I described, and that actually your spouse can still love you after deconstruction, that there can still be a wonderful, happy marriage at the other end of that. And with that, one of the things that I realized is like, we almost had to grieve, or I didn't, but my spouse did. I was just like, leave it all behind. But my spouse almost had to grieve that Christian marriage that we thought we were supposed to have. She had to grieve that like we weren't going to be that couple anymore. We weren't going to be, you know, the power couple at the church. And I think that couple is kind of messed up for a lot of different reasons, the shiny, happy people syndrome. But anyway, it wasn't going to be us anymore. And it's not, because I didn't bring her into this video either. So like for the same reason. So she had to grieve the fact that like that wasn't going to be us anymore. We weren't going to be that like quote unquote Christian couple. And she had to be like, okay, like if Christianity is going to happen in this marriage, like everything maybe is going to be a fight. Like, are we going to have to negotiate? How are we raising the kids? Like, do we tell the kids about God? Do we like bring them to church? Do we, I don't know. They ask like, what happens when we die? Like, what do we say to them? Like, these are all complicated questions. And when the two spouses have two different perspectives on it, it makes for a really difficult situation. So I think like if you're going through deconstruction, like this is all going to happen, and none of it's necessarily easy, especially if your spouse doesn't deconstruct. Now, my spouse did deconstruct, and my spouse was actually raised a Catholic and then was, you know, told by Campus for Christ at university that one didn't count, that she needed to be saved again. So, you know, she got saved and spent 10 years of our marriage, I guess, maybe, I'm just guessing, but we spent about that much as like the evangelical power couple. Fine. But what happened is at some point she was like, I sort of like she kind of came along eventually and was like, yeah, I see like the things that you're saying. And like, I don't think I convinced her. Like she came to her own conclusions about deconstruction, but it also let her celebrate her actual roots. It also let her acknowledge that like the faith tradition that I was raised in wasn't just like a demonic thing I had to repent of and be saved. Like it was a great faith tradition. Like the Catholic Church, you know, has a lot of baggage and flaws, don't get me wrong. But like for her, she got to embrace that part of herself. So she's sort of like, she's still now like in a faith, just, I mean, I am too. I talk about being a Christian a lot, but she is also like still in a Christian space, but a very different place. All of that needs to be negotiated. There's challenges there. So I'm kind of halfway into a list here, but I said like, make your spouse know that they'll still be loved at the other end of it. Don't lash out. Don't be angry. It's not your spouse's fault you're deconstructing. It's not your fault. It just is. Like, that's the other thing is like, both partners need to realize this. Like, people who are deconstructing don't choose deconstruction. If anything, they go into it kicking and screaming. So have patience with yourself, but in the same way, have patience with your spouse, because like, if they're still in a faith tradition that's important to them, like they don't necessarily have to come to the same conclusions you need to come to. So try your best to have like patience with each other and some sympathy and kindness to each other. And I think the place that it really helps with this, if you can get there, is communication. Like if you can talk about it and be vulnerable and be honest and just like share what you're going through and how difficult it is and how scary it is. And don't be afraid to say those things, like instead of just lashing out and be like, that's just bullshit. Like talk about how hard it is, talk about how scary it is. And like, you don't necessarily want to be going through it, but you are, and you have these questions, and communication is great. The more you can do, the better. If it gets too heated, like if you're yelling at each other, maybe take a step back. It doesn't need to be hurtful necessarily, but as much as you can, like try to have these conversations, because it's the only way you're ever going to work through this. Like it's a big, huge thing. And if you get to the point of venting and you need somebody else to vent to, maybe your spouse isn't the right person. Maybe find somebody else you can talk to about it, whether it's like a therapist or someone in a, I don't know, online group, Reddit thread, whatever. Like Find a place to vent that gives you that outlet and makes you feel heard, but isn't necessarily directing all of that energy towards your spouse. I think if you're the one deconstructing, it's worth acknowledging that it's hard for them too. And I think I wasn't very good at this. Like, I thought that deconstruction was just something happening to me, and like she was being too stubborn, because it was obvious to me that, you know, the things I were taught were now bullshit, but she still believed them. And I was like, why is she still believing this? Like, it's so wrong. Your spouse might need to keep following the thing they believe for now or forever. You don't really know. Have patience with them, but also have some sympathy for them, because like now they're going to go sit in a church alone. Now they're going to be the ones who carry on this tradition that's meaningful to them, and you might not be in it anymore. And that's worth having some sympathy for sure. I think also it's important to recognize that it's going to take time to find a new normal. And this is one of the things, like, I've been married for 20 years. I don't know if you can tell looking at me, but I got married pretty young, like most evangelicals. I'm not the same person I was when I got married, but even if I hadn't gone through deconstruction, that would be true. Like, which of us is the same person at 40 that we were at 20? Like, that would almost be pathetic if you were. I almost feel sorry for you if you're the same person at 40 as at 20. So like, you get married to somebody and you take a journey together, and you're two different people in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. Hopefully, I mean, that's a great thing. That's part of life, but like, you need to grow and evolve together. Part of this process might mean that you need to find a new normal, and maybe you even need to find a new marital identity that's not wrapped up in church. You know, maybe find other communities to belong to as a couple that doesn't obsess so much about it. Find like, go, I don't know, join like a squash club or pickleball. Pickleball's all the rage, but seriously, find something to do like that you can just be a couple without people obsessing over your spiritual status. Because when your life revolves around church, that is what it often becomes. And if you need to find a new normal, that can't be your normal anymore. You'll need to find a new way to do it. So over time, I guess it's been probably about 15 years since I deconstructed, maybe about 10 since my wife did. I wouldn't call my wife's like as much deconstruction. Like, mine was like, I was full on evangelical, and then I was like, screw this, I'm out of here. My wife was a little more gentle, like just a reorientation back towards her Catholic faith. But with that came the, like, we can talk about the Bible having problems in it. We can talk about, you know, and a new way for me too, because I got to experience a different tradition than the evangelical one. And, you know, enjoy like liturgy and things like that. So we actually together go to a mainline church today. That's where we kind of hang out now. And that gives me the freedom to like be the person I want to be and not feel pressured to not be somebody I'm not. And it gives her the freedom to stay connected to a tradition that's meaningful to her. So it took a lot of years. It didn't ruin us. We didn't get divorced. But it did take a lot of patience, a lot of time to heal and to like build a new normal. So if you're going through it, I hope some of these reflections are helpful to you. Like, this is far from perfect, just like some random thoughts, no research, just off the top of my head, which is like, as you probably gathered, sometimes how I like to do things. I get more hate in the comments that way, but what am I supposed to do? I'm trying to just share the things that I've learned. Be patient with yourself, be patient with your spouse, communicate, recognize it's hard for them too. Like, you're going through this together in a way, and you can find a new normal. You can find a way beyond it. And one of the things that's changed about me is like, I'm not as angry anymore. 15 years on, I'm like, I remember how angry I was. Like, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like, I was furious. I was like so furious at evangelicalism. And now, like, it's weird. And I make these videos and I think people assume I'm really angry, but I'm actually just like, I think I'm angry at the system. Like, I'm systemically angry, and I get stories from people who are trapped and abused, and like this, I get mad at the ideology, and especially when it doesn't need to be there and we can have Christianity without it. But I'm not actually angry about like those, I'm not that deconstruction angry anymore. I'm not like, because it doesn't have any hold on me. I'm completely free from it. I have, you know, friends who know me who I am, and not just as like an evangelical. I have a communities, multiple, that I can belong to, not because I'm an evangelical and believe the right things, but just because I belong. Like, I just get to be a fully formed human. And that was one of the best things about deconstruction, is like coming to a place where I'm free from all that, like feeling the description that people used to give me when they got saved about how free they felt. I felt like when I went the other way, I felt like that. 15 years on from deconstruction, it's great. And our marriage is great. Like, it's ended in a really good place. And if it's not going to end like that for you, I'm sorry. Like, I know it's a shitty thing for me to be like, oh, it's all good and everything's happy. And like, that might not be everybody's story. But whatever's going to happen, I hope that these reflections have given you something to think about. I hope they help encourage you to be kind to each other, to be kind to your spouse. Again, there's no perfect way to do this, and there's no guaranteed outcome, but I hope that maybe by putting some of these things in place, thinking about some of these things, and having kindness and and compassion for your spouse, even if they're not the ones going through deconstruction. Like, this is happening to them too. They may not have chosen it. And maybe they'll come eventually, who knows? But like, you got to go through this thing together. So I hope that's helpful. That's as close to the evangelical marriage stuff as I'm ever going to get. Not writing a book anytime soon. Gives me hives just thinking about being that couple. I never want to be that couple again. Anyway, I do this because I hope it helps some people. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you have any other questions. My email is in the description. Feel free to drop me an email as well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do that. I talk mostly about ancient Christianity, but a little bit about modern Christianity and deconstruction. And as always, thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time.